Warning: the following video contains disturbing material that may be inappropriate for younger viewers. Parental discretion is advised. Kurten was born into a poor family, the oldest of 13 children. The family lived in a one-room apartment. His parents were both abusive alcoholics, but his father was way worse. He regularly beat both the children and their mother, and often would gather the children together, force their mother to strip naked, and have sex with her in front of them. He eventually went to prison for 18 months for sexually assaulting his 13-year-old daughter repeatedly. At the age of 9, Kurten began working for a local dog catcher. He quickly picked up the older man's cruelty to animals. As they grew more familiar, the man introduced him to bestiality, and Kurten found that he quite liked the combination of the sadism and perversion it offered. At age 13, Kurten met a girl he liked. She didn't mind him undressing her and fondling her, but always stopped him short of intercourse. He took his carnal urges to this neighbor's barn, sexually assaulting their pigs and sheep, and stabbing them as he finished his assault. He only stopped after he was seen stabbing a pig, and the word got out. At 14, his father forced him to quit school and join an apprentice program, but after 2 years, he tired of it. He stole all the money from his home, took 300 marks from his employer, and ran away, resorting to petty thefts to support himself while living on the streets. His father was arrested not too long ago for the repeated sexual abuse of his older daughter, who was only 13, and was sentenced to jail for 3 years. Kurten also began running into trouble with the law. He ended up doing a number of short prison sentences for minor offenses. Each stint in prison only hardened him more and increased the level of cruelty he was capable of inflicting on his victims, which he now began to move away from farm animals to humans. Back out on the streets between prison stays, Kurten committed sexual assaults on unsuspecting women across the city, but his first documented murder was Christine Kling, age 10. Christine was sexually assaulted and stabbed in her room on May 25, 1913, while her parents worked at the pub beneath it. Initially, her uncle was put on trial for the attack, but was found innocent. Kurten was delighted with the shock people expressed when they learned what had been done to such a young girl. He watched the trial of Christine's uncle with great interest, reveling in the horror and suffering he had created. His crimes were cut short for a bit when he was drafted into World War I, but military life didn't suit him, and he deserted, which earned him another stay in prison. This time, he was there until 1921. The longest he'd ever spent in prison. When he was released, he moved to Altenburg and married a woman who used to be a prostitute and had been in jail for murdering her fiancé. Oddly enough, they seemed to have lived a very normal life together. Kurten began working as a molder and became active in his local trade union. After about 4 years, the charm wore off, and Kurten once again found himself drawn back to Dusseldorf. Once relocated, he resumed his petty crimes, but now he had escalated to arson attacks. From there, he began sexual attacks. One of his victims was Maria Kahn. She survived being stabbed 24 times by Kurten, but was unable to identify him. On February 9, 1929, Kurten attacked Rosa Hollinger. Kurten stabbed Rosa 13 times, the violence bringing him to climax. Afterwards, he dumped her body under a hedge and set it on fire to attempt to destroy the remains. She was the first of a number of victims that would become known as the Dusseldorf murders. Over the course of the next 15 months, Kurten's victims would include girls, women, and some men. 5 days after he murdered Rosa, Kurten attacked a 45-year-old mechanic by the last name Shears, stabbed him repeatedly until he was dead. Kurten even had the gall to return to the scene while it was being investigated to speak to police, as if he was a curious bystander. At some point, it seemed like Kurten might get by with his assault. A learning-challenged man named Statisberg was charged with similar crimes and for some reason also admitted to all the murders actually committed by Kurten. He was committed to an asylum, and police believed that the case was closed. They would soon be proven wrong. A series of strangulations and stabbings continued, including the brutal murder of 2 foster sisters, 5-year-old Gertrude and 14-year-old Lois Lenzen, who were murdered at the fairgrounds. The very next day, a woman named Gertrude Schultz was assaulted by Kurten, but she lived through it and was able to give police a vague description of her attacker. She could only say that he was around 40 years old and decent looking. Emboldened by his continued ability to get away with his crimes, Kurten's attacks only became more frequent. The more the German press reported on his monstrous assaults, the more pleasure he seems to take in committing more of them. Residents of Dusseldorf were panicking as the attacks persisted into the winter of 1929. Ida Rutter was sexually assaulted and murdered in September. Elizabeth Dorer was beaten to death in October. Victims by the name of Mirror and Wanders survived brutal attacks, but still no one could identify by Kurten. Every description given of him was only in vague terms that the police were unable to match to any one individual. Kurten delighted in it all. The hysteria and horror expressed by the masses and printed by the papers only served as fuel for his attacks. He even contacted one of the newspapers in November and provided them with a map that would lead them to 5-year-old Gertrude Alberman, a girl he had stabbed to death before discarding her body underneath the rubble 2 days earlier. By the spring of 1930, Kurten's assault had become non-fatal in nature, whether it was on purpose or by accident. The tales of the victims made for good news, regaling the city with their harrowing details of the encounter with a man known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, a name that was given to him by the newspaper due to the reports that he liked to drink the victims' blood from their wounds. The police were now under the gun as well. Their continued failure to bring the killer to justice was a subject of criticism and rebuke, but that was about to change. In May of 1930, Kurten offered to let a young unemployed woman named Butlick stay with him in his apartment in hopes of having sex with her. When she denied him, he agreed to find her another place to stay and headed to the train station with her. On the way there, he detoured into the nearby forest and sexually assaulted her before letting her go. She was the first victim that actually knew the name of the attacker. Still, police didn't know they were about to arrest the man they had been seeking for many other crimes. Knowing he would probably be jailed, Kurten began preparing for his incarceration. He went home and told his wife about all his crimes and advised her that he was the one they called the Vampire of Dusseldorf. He told her that there was a large reward and that she should be the one to turn him in so that she could collect the money to take care of herself while after he was imprisoned. On May 14th, 1930, Kurten's wife did just as her husband told her. She reported him to the police and they took them to the local church, where Kurten surrendered to them peacefully. After his arrest, Kurten sat down with a psychiatrist and professor named Karl Berg, giving him detailed accounts of the crimes. Berg would go to publish Kurten's confessions in a book called The Sadist. Kurten recounted 79 separate criminal acts. It is believed that he was also keen in giving details on every crime, to ensure that his wife, who he possessed an odd fondness for, despite his crimes, got the full reward for turning him in. Then again, he may have just enjoyed reliving the terror he had inflicted on so many and the horror that Berg and the stenographers capturing his confession must have felt. Kurten's trial began on April 13th, 1931. He was set to answer for 9 murders and 7 attempted murders. He arrived in a well-tailored suit and retracted his original confession, claiming he had only been trying to ensure his wife's financial security. However, 2 months after being grilled by the magistrate and the evidence presented against him eventually forced him to admit his guilt. He showed no emotion and blamed his childhood and experiences in the German prison system, showing no remorse for the harm he had done to so many. It took the jury only an hour and a half to determine he was guilty. On all accounts, he was sentenced to death by execution. He made his way to the guillotine. He told the executioner, "Tell me, after my head is chopped off, will I be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasures to end all pleasures." July 2nd, 1931, the Vampire of Dusseldorf was executed by guillotine. After his death, his head was preserved and sliced in half. It was believed that a study on his brain might reveal some defect that caused his perversity and sadistic behavior. Nothing unusual was found. Kurten's mummified and split head can still be seen on display at Ripley's Believe It or Not in Wisconsin. The scar on his scalp caused by a falling piece of iron at the foundry where he once worked is still visible after all these years. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment who you think the next serial killer is going to be. And also remember to comment down below anything having to do with the video for a chance to be on a daily shout out. You can also follow me or reach out to me on Twitter, and I have a Twitch channel that I play some games on. Both will be linked in the description down below. Until next time, guys, sweet dreams.